Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be discussing dating after abuse with our special guest, Charity Sinclair. So thank you for joining us today, Charity.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yes, we are very excited to have you with us today. When we met prior to this, we just knew this was going to be a fun conversation to have. So we are really glad you were able to get on here and join us.
Awesome. Let's have some fun.
Awesome. So before we jump into the discussion today, though, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a Boston-based author. I just came out with a book, We're All Dating the Same Guy, and it's essentially my personal story that has very relatable dating stories, I think, for the rest of specifically a woman audience who either is getting out of a relationship, in a tough relationship, single, dating. And it's my personal experience about getting out of a relationship with a narcissist, calling off my wedding, and then dating afterwards. And how did I heal? What did myself, my health journey look like? What were the absurd dating stories that I came across? How did my trauma from my last relationship show up in some of my new relationships? So I touch on, in addition, I also touch on a topic of I'm getting older. I'm a woman in my mid 30s. How do I think about having kids? And so a lot of kind of topics that I think are relevant, hopefully for your audience. And that's a little bit about my personal story. And the reason I wanted to tell it was to hopefully help other women who have been through the same thing as me. And when I broke up and got out of my relationship, I read a lot about narcissism and kind of the heavy stuff that comes along with that. And that's what I found. It was quite heavy. And so I wanted to write something I think that gave women hope and was a bit lighter in terms of content and be able to tell my story and let people know that there's hope after this. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, thank you for that. And yeah, we know that a lot of people, especially when they're in that, especially in the midst of the abuse, it really feels like there is no hope, or this is just kind of how it is. So it's really nice when we can have people come on to be able to let them know, like, yes, there is hope after this. It doesn't suck forever. So it is really nice to be able to get that messaging out there to people.
And also that there is no perfect, just time frame to dating afterward either. Everybody has bad dating stories, but when you look at people who have trauma from past, maybe abuse or experiences like that, they think that this is just them dealing with it and that there's no way forward out of it. So I think that going through some of that kind of stuff will just be nice for people to hear and be like, yeah, I can relate to that. It's nice to know that it's not just me.
Oh yeah, and I was not perfect out of the gate, right? And figuring out how to practice healthy dating and what to look for, like anything in life, it takes practice, and it was definitely a journey of that. So, giving ourselves some self-compassion, I think, along the way was a huge theme.
Yeah, and that's definitely stuff we're going to be getting into this episode today. So, really, Charity, a lot of this, especially when we had spoken prior, a lot of this stemmed from breaking off that marriage, breaking off that wedding, realizing ooh, maybe this isn't the person that I should be marrying. So what was kind of the things that you saw that led you to the point of ooh, I actually need to kind of cut this off before we progress any further?
Yeah. So some of the context, I guess, for your audience around just my story, I was with this guy for 7 years. The type of relationship we had, I would say, was the most polarizing relationship I had ever been with, which is a red flag in itself, right? We had really high highs and lows, and there was just a lot of up and downs, and it was like no other relationship I had been in. So, and I had communicated that in our relationship, and of course, he gassed me and was like, those other relationships weren't real ones, right? So that was kind of some of the stuff that I was dealing with. But we were set to get married, and I essentially had come back from my bachelorette party, had so much fun with my girlfriends. And in the office the next day, I get a text on my phone that's like, hey, is this so-and-so's fiance? I'm like, yeah, who's this? She's like, oh, it's his ex-girlfriend. We just broke up a couple months ago. And I'm like, what? So my head starts worrying, like my eyes are like turning into the size of golf balls, not even like comprehending what's happening in this text thread, right? Because I had been with this guy straight for 7 years, and she said she had just gotten out of a 4-year relationship with him. And so I confronted my fiance at the time and asked, like, who is this girl? And he gave the response of, oh, she's just crazy. She's a friend I know from Detroit where I work, and she wanted to date me, but I said no. So she's really upset, and this is why she's getting back at me. Don't listen to her. Don't listen to her. And after the fact, when I read a lot about narcissism, like one of the textbook things that they do is talk about their exes being crazy. And so that was something like a light bulb afterwards where I was like, oh yeah. And so I was really confused, probably for the first couple of days of what was going on. Is it true? Is it not true? Because he had an answer for every single question that I asked him. I looked on his phone. There was no trace there in his email, nothing. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe this girl could be crazy. And the only way that I could really know for myself was I had to call her, which of course was so daunting. And I get on the phone with her. She's telling her story in a not at all crazy voice. She seems like a very cool girl. And she sent me all this evidence to back up her story, right? And so at that point, I kind of knew that was the flag for me. And one thing that I'll always thank myself for doing within this relationship was I had set my bottom line, and I had read a book, like a couple of years into our relationship, that talked about doing that. And so you're setting expectations about what's help, if you do this, then I'll walk. And I think since I had set that boundary, if you ever cheat on me, I will walk. It was so much easier in that moment to decide to be able to walk. Because he knew what I'd do. Whereas if I hadn't said that, or if I was married and had kind of that pressure of we commit ourselves to life, I would have perhaps really struggled with that decision to be able to walk away. But because we weren't married yet, I ended up calling off my wedding literally 4 weeks before it was set to happen. And like all the invitations have been sent out, all the vendors were booked. So it was, that of course was also daunting in itself. But so that was, I think, the moment where I was willing to walk away. It was like, whoa, this is real. And if this guy could be hiding this information, what else is he hiding? Right? Because actually after that, and that's one of the things that I realized too, is his stories will constantly change. And that's something with an abuse. When they get outed, right, their story changes slightly. And so he told me when I chatted with this girl and confronted him, his story changed to, oh, well, okay, yeah. So we dated, but I've been faithful ever since. And sure enough, there was actually another woman that came out of the woodwork. And it was because we had posted our wedding registry online, that's how they were finding us. And so she had reached out to me and was like, oh my God, I had no idea he was dating someone else, never mind marrying someone else. We've been like casually together for the last 10 months. And so this whole time that he was saying, ever since I called it off with this other girl, I have been, honest and faithful to you. He wasn't, he was with and so at that point I was like, this is beyond just normal cheating. Like this guy has no empathy. So it got crazy quick. And I kind of cut it off cold turkey, and said, hey, if you want to coordinate me for any of the wedding cancellation, whatever, talk to my brother, right? Because I was reading about, how to do a breakup in a good way. And they said, especially with narcissists, they're constantly going to gaslight you. And, there's a lot of emotional abuse there. And the only way that you can confront it is cold turkey. So I did that. And then he started stalking me, and I got a restraining order. And I think the most messed up part about that process is I went to a defense attorney to get advice on my case. And he basically was like, yeah, he confirmed, okay, the stalking is happening, whatever, but keep your money. Don't get it. Like, I think it's like very low possibility that you're going to be able to get a restraining order. Yeah, I know. I was thinking the same thing. And it was, so I found at that point that the law, so basically he was advising that I had to prove that the stalking was with intent to hurt me. And at the point at which, if I could prove that, then I could get the restraining order. If he was just stalking me, then whatever, which is kind of messed up from a law perspective, because it's like, okay, so I have to get abused, like physically abused first before the law is going to protect me. So against my defense lawyer's own advice to not hire him because he didn't think that the case was good enough, I did. And so it was more, I think, of a intimidation aspect at that point of like, look, I'm going to get like a lawyer involved and like stay the F away from me. And we went to court, and it was very contentious. The two lawyers were arguing back and forth over like what one clause meant within the law, and the judge actually had to deliberate on it. And sure enough, though, he referenced another case in which there was another woman with a very similar situation that ended up getting a restraining order. And so it was because of that one other woman that I was able to get my restraining order. And so there's, sometimes we don't realize this ripple effect that happens of taking that one step to positivity, to redemption, to independence and freedom, and how much that can help other women who perhaps are in the same situation as you. And so she doesn't even know, right, that it impacted me,
Right.
but I'm forever grateful for that person out there.
Well, and this might also just be like a difference in state law, but like I'm pretty sure like to get a PPO or a restraining order, it's like any reasonable person that could be fearful that
Mm-hmm.
that person could do something. Like you were a reasonable person who was fearful they could do something. Like it shouldn't require them to have done something physical to hurt you before you can get that.
Yeah. And it definitely differs state by state.
Yeah.
And I'm from Boston. And so when I moved back to Boston, I chatted with my friend here who's a defense lawyer, and he's like, yeah, no. We hand them out like hotcakes. Like, we're not waiting for someone to get hurt, right? Because then it's
Yeah.
on the court. So it definitely does differ.
Yeah. And that's just wild to me.
Yep.
Like the point of the restraining order should be to make it so they don't get physically hurt.
Yeah. It's so silly. So
Yeah.
silly.
Yeah. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of hit on here, so you had set that bottom line. You knew what your deal breaker was going to be, and you were able to follow through with that. Coincidentally, we had just done another interview with somebody who had really talked about how she had her deal breakers, but because of the relationship she was in and the abuse that she experienced, she realized that that boundary started to get a little bit blurry for her.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so how was it you found that you were able to stick to your deal breaker in that situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's more of a guttural, intuitive body answer than anything else. Like, I just felt it deep within my soul that like I could not marry this man. I had to walk away. I don't know. And maybe that's part of like how I was brought up, or the how I see infidelity. I'm not sure. All the answer I have is just like I just felt it in my body, and that was a relationship. That relationship of feeling it to my body was not something that I had cultivated within my relationship, which is, if I had been listening to that more often, I probably would have walked sooner within that relationship because I was so unhappy. But I was in my head instead of my body. And I was logicizing things away, making excuses. Every relationship has their problem, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is normal, maybe I should stay. So I think in that moment, just because it was so innate to who I was, I couldn't. And also because it wasn't a deal breaker of like, oop, I like drank too much and like slipped once. It was like, no, this was repeated and for 4 years. And like he lived an entirely different double life where he had visited the girl's family. He said he was going to move up there. Like the lies went deep. And then it wasn't just that, right? Like I saw him compulsively lying even as this information was coming out. And so I just lost complete and all trust. And how can you go up and, you know, in a hold hands with someone and vow to like be with them forever when he has literally broken all trust. So I would say there definitely the deal breaker was the deal breaker, but on other elements of our relationship, they definitely slipped. So, and this is where it got to this kind of like polarizing up and down where his communication wasn't great. And, you know, probably because he was balancing other women. And so he would leave me in the dark or go dark for a couple hours or say he was working late. He was in sales. And so he did a lot of networking and would be out late for certain events, which I realized perhaps maybe some of them weren't events and he was actually just dating other women. And so in that way, I would get to the point where I'd get upset that we wouldn't be on the same page or communicating. And he would be responsive for maybe like a couple weeks or a month. He'd be, you know, he'd listen to me because he'd realize that I was getting to the edge and like willing to walk. And so, and that's part of the emotional abuse, right? Is that he'd come back into this, everything's okay. I'm going to do like, put all my energy into our relationship to keep you just enough. And so in that way, I don't know if they were deal breakers, but there were definitely things that I wanted in a relationship that I was compromising on because it was this like toxic, emotional, abusive push and pull.
And sometimes it's really hard in the moment to understand what's happening, like when those wants and needs that you have are getting skewed a little bit. Like it's usually not a bright glaring red flag that you see that you're like, "Oh, I'm giving up a part of myself when I, just be okay with not getting that text message back or not getting that phone call." Like it's those little things that start to build up and it just pushes and pushes and pushes that boundary to where you're like, if you look at your beginning boundary and your boundary now, like they're very far apart, but because it happens so gradually and it happens like little bits at a time, it can be really hard to recognize that it's happening.
100%, Amanda. Like it wasn't right. Like first couple months, like he was on his best behavior. Like this was over the course of years where like that type of behavior would come out and happen. And when it's almost like imperceptible at that point because it's so slow that it happens for sure. And like another thing, I actually post getting out of that relationship, I had thought for so long that I had a really bad memory. I was like, oh, maybe I just didn't remember that event right. And like, this was his version and whatever, right? Because we fight about like, I get upset about something and he's like, no, that's not how it happened. But he was gaslighting me. And I realized it's not that I have a bad memory. It's that literally I have been like within this questioning of reality of what happened for so long that I thought I did. And so coming out of that relationship actually now, I've built up kind of the confidence to like, this is my perspective. And even if someone has a different interpretation of what happened, I'm staying true to how I originally feel, which I think was a skill that I had to build back up because I became so inconfident in kind of how I perceived a situation that I was like, oh yeah, maybe I wasn't remembering it right. Which is kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, like just think about how easy that is then for someone to get away with doing stuff. Is if I can convince someone that their memory is bad, like I can do whatever I want, and then like, oh no, you're just misremembering that situation.
Oh, this is how manipulative it was, like wild. So my friends actually saw him once on another date. And he called my best friend and was like, hey, is Charity still in a relationship with so and so? Like, I see him out right now with another girl. And so she immediately called me and was like, hey, where's so and so? My other friend says that he sees him out. And so I immediately call my boyfriend at the time, and I'm like, "Where are you?" And he answers over FaceTime. He's like, "Oh, I'm driving home right now." Right? Because there was like a little bit of a time change in between her having called me and like because he ended up seeing my friend. So he knew, oh, I might be getting a call. So what happened was he was like, "That's not true. I was working the whole time. Ask your friend, what color shirt was I wearing? What color shirt was I wearing?" And my friend was like, when you see one of your friends potentially cheating on someone else, do you remember their shirt color? Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think so, right? Like there's
Yeah.
like you're kind of in like shock. And so my friend's like, blue? I don't know. And he was sitting in front of me on the FaceTime with a white collared shirt and a blazer. And who knows if he changed in the car,
Mhm.
or what. But that like one little detail, and he ended up like when we broke up, he ended up actually confirming like he was at the movie theater that night. So the fact that like he could gaslight all my friends even when they saw him in public is just kind of wild, the amount of manipulation that went on. And my friend ended up apologizing, being like, "Oh man, I'm sorry, like you must have had a doppelganger. I could have sworn it was you," right? Like feeling bad when really
Man.
it was him. So it was just like it was next level. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is some diabolical stuff. Be like,
Yes.
yeah, I'm gonna carry a different color shirt in my car because this might come up one day where I have to quick change to try and cover my ass. Like, what?
Yep. Yeah. And he had all his dry cleaning in the back. So, the story lined up. And it was looking back, I'm like, oh man, that was so stupid. I should have, trusted my friend. But even he had him questioning. So it was
Yeah.
just wild.
Yeah. Unfortunately, abusive people, they don't have to be creative, but they are smart.
Yeah. Yeah. Very smart. And it's unfortunate because, like, if they had put their talents towards something else, they could really do a lot of good.
Well, it's like I was just thinking like this person's so good at like gaslighting people. Like they would like they said he worked in sales. I'm like that makes
Yep.
sense. Like that logically makes sense to me. Like
Yep.
someone who's so easy to convince other people of things. Like yeah, that's someone you want in sales.
Yep. Yeah. He was very good at his job.
Well, and like we were talking about before with people in sales and the mask.
Yeah.
Like they know how to put on the face that someone else needs to see or hear in order to get what they want out of it.
Mhm.
Something actually that I read about. So cluster B personality disorders are characterized as NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, and sociopathy actually, and psychopathy is in there too. And they essentially talk about how because they don't have the kind of remorse or emotional like empathy, so how this happens is something traumatic happens within their childhood where that wiring shuts off. It's a protection mechanism. Our body's really smart. And so with that protection mechanism, they can't feel empathy anymore. And so how they try to assimilate and normalize within the world is to watch people's body cues, in order to be able to quote unquote feel the empathy. And so they say a lot of the times that sociopaths have sixth sense because they've had to develop that skill of reading people because they can't do it emotionally. So that was an interesting finding as I read about some of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so Charity, one of the reasons that we have you on today was again kind of talking about what it was like dating after this situation. So really kind of getting into that. When you first started dating again, after having called off your wedding and gotten out of this relationship that you'd been in for 7 years, what was that like?
Yeah, it was I have been in a long relationship, so when I was back on the market, I was kind of excited to get back out there and experience different people, and I had a lot of different fun adventures, and I don't think I realized kind of the trauma portion of my relationship until it came up, I think, a little bit deeper into like the courting process. An example of that is I was dating a younger guy and he was young and in love, and I interpreted his in love as like legit love bombing. I was like, this isn't right. So like, and then he gaslit me. But the gaslighting was like, oh, you said you were going to FaceTime me. And I was like, no, I didn't. He was like, yeah, you said you were going to FaceTime me. Come on. And so that to me was like, oh my God, this person is a complete narcissist. I have to put them in this toxic box. But actually, really, what was happening was he was just a super anxious guy. And somehow, maybe subconsciously, he learned that type of behavior. Not to say that behavior, like all gaslighting is bad, but he had learned this somewhere, right? And was using it probably unconsciously. And so when I had brought up what he was doing, he was like, oh my God, first of all, I didn't know there was a term for that. And two, I didn't realize it. Like, I didn't realize how serious that was for you and how it impacted you. And so even his like emotional attunement to me and like understanding when I did bring it up, all those different signs can be how you can understand whether someone can be healthy for you or unhealthy for you. Even though they may be showing like some of these toxic signals, not everyone is a narcissist just because, you know, it may just be how they were brought up and the relationships that they were shown and how they related to the world. And so kind of distangling what is like a super toxic person versus someone who may just like not be great at healthy relationship behavior was something that I had to figure out for myself. And, you know, but I was very early on when I, of being single and I dated this guy. But so that for me totally like wrung my trauma area. And I was like, I can't date this guy. Nope. He's toxic. He's toxic. When even though he was being responsive and like he was very consistent in his words and actions, he wasn't breadcrumbing me, but it was enough. It was enough for me to walk away. So I found that I was like really quick to put people in the danger box because I was so heightened in my kind of threat for just toxic behavior. And that can be great sometimes too, because then you actually do sniff out the toxic people. And I was able to do that instead of dating them. And, you know, going 6 months in, a year in, I was able to do it within a month, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe one date or 2 dates. And so it wasn't all bad, right? Because I had learned these skills of like what's healthy dating versus not. So that was, I guess, a little bit of how it showed up for me. But I also had a ton of fun, a ton of different adventures. The diversity of people that you meet out there is just wild. And dating so many folks, I think, really restored my faith in men. That like the majority of people actually are great. There's a stat that actually narcissists account for like 6% of the population. So it's relatively small, even though the word sometimes can be overused. And I'd like to say that, you know, I'd like to think that I met mostly great guys and it was just about figuring out what fit and what didn't fit. And also like, how did I play a part in my last relationship, right? It takes two to tango. What were my toxic things that I was doing? And for example, one of them was we get into a fight and I would essentially, I call it icing, just like don't talk to them, don't respond to their calls for like days on end. And that, gosh, I'm forgetting. Oh, the Gottman Institute, Gottman researcher, he can predict with like 95% accuracy whether a couple will stay together or not. And stonewalling, aka icing, is one of the toxic factors. So I was doing that in order to kind of like have, you know, it was my way of like fighting for my own, I don't know, security within the relationship, but it was like so unhealthy. And so how could I detangle that and instead practice like having the honest conversation? So that's something when I dated again, that I kind of went forward and practiced. Like I would catch myself doing it or wanting to do it and then be like, no, I'm going to have the conversation. So I'd pick up the phone, I'd have a really deep breath and be like, let's go. Right. And I'd have the honest conversation. And, you know, it's not as scary as you think, especially when you have it multiple times.
Yeah. One of the things I want to point out is like the use of like unhealthy behaviors and stuff is like what you're talking about is like, yeah, we all at some point have probably done something unhealthy in our relationships, because we're all human, we're not perfect. Like, we're going to make those mistakes. The difference is, in your ex, when the mistakes were made, the pattern gets established of him continually using it, where you recognize, like, oh, I do this thing, I shouldn't do this. Let me learn to not do that, so I stop doing that in my relationships. And that's the difference between like the unhealthy and like abusive relationships. Like, we all do unhealthy stuff from time to time, but if we learn from it, it goes back to being healthy. When we don't learn from it, or we just continually do the unhealthy stuff, that's when it becomes the abusive relationship then.
100%. And you can attune to that emotional response and or responsiveness in your partner, right? So like when you're telling them something, are they attuning to you? Are they responding, or do they continue with some of that same behavior? And it's funny you say that, because years later, after I broke it off with my fiance, his most recent ex-girlfriend reached out to me, and she was like, hey, you don't know me, but I know you, right? Because he had to tell a story of like, I almost got married. So she knew who I was. And she was like, another girl reached out to me. She was also dating him at the same time. So it was just like same story, different
Mm-hmm.
day. And like he was doing the same type of stuff to other women. Um, so it's just so unfortunate. And it's like, at what point, you know, am I going to be the person to reach out to all these different women to warn them and whatever? Like, that's also going to be exhausting. So we ourselves have to build up the skill set to be able to recognize it and walk away and, and be a resource for other folks. But yeah, that was a journey of figuring out, what's the difference between healthy and unhealthy, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. And because, it, whenever we leave a relationship and then we get into a new one, it's never like, hey, in my last relationship, these are the things that I recognize I did wrong, right? It's always, well, the other person did this, because we don't like to talk badly about ourselves. We don't want to like put our worst traits out there for someone new to see. So, there's a distinct, my ex-girlfriend was crazy pattern that likes to play out. And, you know, we tend to want to believe that, because we want to believe that this person that I'm starting to date isn't the one that did bad things or didn't have healthy boundaries or did whatever. So, we like to we'll jump on that bandwagon of, oh yeah, that was a crazy ex-girlfriend.
Yeah. And I guess part of like the coping for getting out of a breakup that I'd recommend to anyone is like doing your own retro on what you liked about the relationship, what you didn't like about the relationship, when you first felt like you wanted to break up with this person. When you do that analysis, you can then use that as ammo for your going into your next one to pick a healthier partner. But I think a lot of the times people skip that part and just go straight into the next one, making the same mistakes. And so there are a couple of books that helped me in particular on how to break up, how to get past it. And there are two that I'll call out. One is called Getting Past Your Breakup, and the other one is This Is Me Letting You Go. And they both had great resources and tips for how to do that retro, and kind of understand where you played a part too.
And I love that too, because like I can easily see, and looking back on like some of the relationships that I've had, especially for like a good stretch of like time, there's a good like couple years where like every relationship I would get into, I'd be like, this is great. And then there'd be something that I would do that would be done to actively sabotage it. And I'm like, I shouldn't do that in relationships. But I never took the time to reflect on that, to continually just repeat that cycle over and over multiple different relationships. I'm like, cool. So now I'm the person who was shitty in all those relationships because I never wanted to take the time to pause and be like, hey man, maybe you got to figure some stuff out before you start another relationship again.
So perfect for sure.
So
Well, and
a
so
fun
many
couple
of those
years.
times, like we're talking about people who are in their like late teens and early 20s, right? Like your own emotional awareness isn't even fully developed yet. And, um, you know, to ask like a 19-year-old, okay, can you reflect back on the relationship and what you may have done and what you had done to you that would make your next relationship healthier? When you're 19 years old, you're not like, I need a nice, healthy relationship to last me for the rest of my life. You're like, I want to go party, right?
Mhm.
So we kind of almost set ourselves up for some of those bad experiences because we're not we're not maybe necessarily looking at like a long-term healthy relationship as the end goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Charity, one of the things you were talking about too, especially like after you had gotten out, was how the way that I describe it is like your radar for potential like abuse was like set at a really high level, right? And when we talked about this prior to this recording, this is actually something I've started using in some of my presentations, helping people be able to communicate with their friends about abuse. Because once they get out of the abusive relationship, it's part of the reason why victims of abuse have a hard time like trusting a new partner, is they might recognize a sign early and say like, oh, this is just abusive, and not recognize that as unhealthy, or their radar is set so high that they're really trying to make sure that they don't let what happened to them happen to them again.
Yeah.
So what was it that really helped you in figuring out how to like more fine tune that radar?
Yeah. And I will say this is still a work in progress. It's not perfect and it's a journey. And there are still times where it comes up where I have to use certain tools. And a lot of it is when trauma is triggered, it's your lizard brain, it's your subconscious brain. And in order to calm that part of your body down and process what's happening more logically, you have to get your body back into a relaxed state. And the only way to do that, like, and at that point, you're ruminating, right? You're like, oh my God, this is happening. You're creating all these stories. Nothing that's happening within your brain when you ruminate is helping to, in order to get you back to normal land. Even though you could, within your rumination, talk about, I know that I'm probably being crazy right now, but, right? And so what I've used as a practice is really breathing. And because that is attached to your autonomic nervous system, and that can bring you back into that relaxed state to then process things more logically. So that technique and just like the relationship between your body and understanding when it's going off, how to bring it back into alignment, and then approach the conversation, approach the situation. And having a healthy partner is going to understand moments when you're triggered, and when you communicate them, hopefully they're really responsive and it doesn't keep repeatedly happening. And so that's something too where I um, picked a relationship where he was understanding of that, and it got better and better over time, like each time it happened, and to the point where now like he doesn't do certain things because he knows that it impacts me in a certain way. And not to say like the other person has to completely change, right? It has to be a mix and match between the two, and adjusting your behavior as well. But I think just picking a partner that can be responsive to your triggers is really helpful as well, and helps kind of increase that trust bond. I will say one of the things that I still kind of struggle with sometimes is that and that my partner like was like, we've been together for so long, like, don't you trust me by now? Right. When certain situations come up, and I'll say, you don't understand. I was with someone for 7 years and they turned on a dime. So that means to me that I could be with someone for an entire decade, right? And then their true colors may come out. So that is, I think, still something that I'm working on, right? And building that trust over time is definitely something that helps. Other tools in my tool belt in terms of dialing down the notch. I think exposure to different men and dating, just putting yourself out there and getting a good gauge of what does healthy behavior look like versus not. So when you're talking about, and I actually hired a dating coach to help me with this in particular. And it was nice because some of the advice that he gave was around there should be like a healthy on ramp to the courting phase. So in the first couple months, if the velocity of your communication is not increasing, if you guys aren't moving towards having the conversation about a relationship, about exclusivity, that's probably a good sign that they may not be as interested, or a good opportunity to talk and have that honest conversation and be willing to walk away. And the more dates that you go on, the more you're willing and comfortable to have those conversations, because you know you're not in this scarcity mindset of like, oh my God, this guy's the last person on earth. And if I don't have him, then it's going to be bad. So I'm going to compromise on my certain needs. So instead, having an abundance mindset, you go out with a bunch of different folks and really understand what's out there, what guys are willing to give to you and show you what you're worth versus not. And you can kind of through experience understand what's out there. And I think that really helped too. So that ramp part and looking for certain cues, I think really helped. And just like what to look for. And so another thing is their words versus actions. So if they said, oh man, that date was awesome, I really want to take you out again, but then they don't, you don't hear from them in a week. And then you reach out and you're like, hey, how's it going? And they're like, oh, I've been meaning to get back to you. I've just been so busy. Really like you, da, 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 right? Like that's kind of breadcrumbing behavior, and how much do you stick around for that or not? And if they really liked you, they would be following up. And so just looking for that, especially within my toxic relationship, he was saying the world to me. He was promising me everything, but his actions were not lining up at all. And I had such a tough time deciphering between those two things because I was listening so much to his words, which were the potential, which were the dream, which is what I wanted, right? So he was playing into what I wanted. And so matching words with actions, I think, is huge. And just like really assessing potential partners for that is big. And just consistency, like, are they consistent in how they're reaching out? And I think all those things can help in building the trust, in helping with kind of the gauge, and being kind of like overstimulated for trauma. And of course there's like somatic therapy and a bunch of different therapies out there too that can help. But as for me and my personal experience, I found just like exposure and getting out, and like building this trust that there are great people out there who will show you that consistency. You may just have to reprioritize what you find attractive in a partner, right? Like before, when I was dating my ex, I was prioritizing like his finances. Even though I had a great career, I didn't need a man to pay for me for anything, but it was almost like a biological need. And what I was prioritizing, this like the man has to provide. And I was like, wait, I can rewrite this rule. I don't need them to make more money than me. I don't need them to buy me dates and whatever. And even though it might be nice, right, to feel doted on. And I think reprioritizing where finances stood, in instead of like having money, the rejiggering was, do we have the same financial values? How do we think about debt? How do we think about saving? And in order to know those things, you have to know it for yourself, right? So if you're not educated on finances, are you going to be able to pick a partner that has the right things? And so that's something I think afterwards that I definitely retuned on. I will say when it comes to charisma, my ex was the sales guy, as we were talking about, was great in social situations. And I loved that because I'm also a very social person. But over time, I realized that like he always wanted to be the center of attention. Like I would get ignored in a room when he was focusing on everyone else and storytelling and whatever. And it got old after a while. And I realized like, oh, maybe I don't want someone that like needs all the attention on them. And so that too kind of flip-flopped up for me and what I found attractive in a partner. So yeah, I think there are a lot of things of like, what do you value that change, that help with not re-triggering the trauma as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, and as you go through relationships, like how you talked about having like that bottom line, that can change as well, right? Like maybe in this early relationship of my life, being cheated on was my bottom line, but now that I've grown and assessed what I want more with myself and my life, that bottom line has changed to whatever it is.
Mhm.
And so that's something that can grow with you as you're going through different relationships. It's not stagnant.
Mhm. And I really liked that like discussion of the healthy on ramp in there, because that was the thing personally for me, like that I had to work on. Is I never knew how to have the conversation with somebody. I'm not really feeling this relationship, so I think we probably should just kind of like end it here. Um, and because I lacked the ability to have that conversation, or I'm like, I don't want to hurt somebody by telling them like, oh, this isn't really actually working out. I would just like tell my brain like, no, you did like this person. It's like it's okay. Like you'll get back to that. You're never gonna get back to that when you're like, I don't think I really like want to be with this person. Um, and that was something that I really had to work on was how do I have a conversation with somebody about, well, we started out obviously like when you start talking to somebody new, like it's really nice and it's really exciting. But once that like initial excitement dies down, like do you still want to talk to this person? Do you still want to go out with this person? And if you don't, how do you have that conversation? And if you're not willing to have that conversation, you're really just setting yourself up to have a very long series of potentially unhealthy relationships because you're never going to end up in that relationship where you're like, yes, I do like being here. It's always, I didn't want to be here, but I feel like I have to be because I'm trying to avoid hurting this person. When in the long run, you're just going to hurt them more.
Yes, and hurt yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because time is like our most scarce resource. And if you're not willing to be vigilant about how you spend it and with who you're with, and you want to be with folks that amplify who you are.
Mhm.
And so if you're like constantly worrying about like how to how to break up with them when you're with them, that's not how you want to spend your time either. So it benefits both of you to have that conversation, even though it's difficult in the moment. And hopefully the person on the other side is mature enough to really like see it as a benefit. And maybe not in the moment they're hurt, right? And that's
Yeah.
okay. But that's the game of love is we're putting our hearts out there again to be heartbroken and it will
Mhm.
happen. And
Yeah.
we have to be like okay with that if we want love in our life.
Hmm. And we talked about this previously, prior to the recording, about how you like to use like have a lot of like humor and comedic around like the relationships and stuff that you had. So the really funny part is because I actively avoided doing that. It was one of the things I was working with my therapist on, and she told me I was like, hey, I really don't think I want to pursue this person anymore, and I don't know how to have that conversation. She's like, just tell them. And I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds really hard to me, and I don't know if I want to do that. I left that therapy session from to a text message from her, the girl I had been seeing at the time, saying, "Hey, I've been talking to somebody else too, and I really think I want to pursue that relationship." Um, and I was like, "Oh, cool, worked itself out. I don't have to do it now." Um, and I was talking to my therapist about it the next time I saw her, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that worked itself out." Like she texted me and said she didn't want to like pursue this. She was seeing somebody else, and it was gonna work out. And my therapist was like, so the lesson you got from this is if you just keep waiting, eventually it'll work itself out. I was like, absolutely. Why do I have to do it? Eventually it will work itself out. And it's just like, no, 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 no. We have to actually work on this. But I thought it was really funny. I was like, I was working up the courage to be able to do it, and it worked itself out.
Happens like that sometimes and leave it to a therapist to keep you honest on yeah your
Yeah.
actions.
Oh, she knew for sure that was going to be the message I took from that.
And like you said, Charity, the person's never going to be like maybe necessarily happy with it at the time, right? Because they're hurt and they are, being told that what they are isn't the person that we want to continue to be with. But in hindsight, like when you look back at the relationships in your life, no one is ever going to be like, wow, I wish we'd have dragged that on for another 2 months because that would have just really been great for me. Like, no, let's cut it off like while the wounds are still bleeding. Like, we don't need to wait until it dries up and then have to go through 2 months of a bad relationship at that point where we're not valuing ourselves and then cut it off. Like, it's
Definitely. Yeah. And it's like, if you know that death is going to happen, would you rather like a slow, torturous, like turn of the knife or just to be stabbed through the heart, right? Like you want to go quick.
Mm-hmm.
So do that service to your fellow partner who's also dating out there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I know you wanted to really hit on a bit, and you've talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to make sure we gave you the time and space to actually be able to do it, was working on building that confidence that you had in yourself after that abusive relationship. Because we know that when someone's in an abusive relationship, when they're experiencing abuse, a lot of times it's the confidence that they have in themselves that's the thing getting taken down and taken away from them. Because their abusive partner does not want their partner to have confidence, because it makes it easier for them to be able to work up that strength and courage to be able to leave that relationship. So what was that like for you, and how did you go about being able to regain and build up that confidence?
Yeah. And it's funny because, like, I think I've always seen myself as a confident person, like, even in my toxic relationship. Um, so that I think was also confusing for me. You know, I came out of that being like, how did this happen to me? I feel like I'm a smart, you know, career-oriented woman who has my head on straight. Like, how did I get stuck? And I think it gave me so much more empathy for all the women who have been in toxic relationships. Because maybe before I didn't understand how they happened. And maybe I judged them of like, oh my gosh, that guy's treating her like crap. Like, how could she be in that? And then sure enough, it was me. And so I just experienced that like slow build. And it just gave me so much more empathy for other people and really listening to their stories. And like, yeah, it happens to all of us. And um, in terms of building up my confidence, yeah, I think my biggest kind of weakness, I think, within that past relationship was being so head oriented and not in my body, not in my stomach, not in my heart. And so I had to build that relationship back. So I worked with a therapist where, like, we go into conversations and I'd say a story and, you know, she'd say back to me, like, okay, how does that feel in your body? Where do you feel it in your body? And at first you're like, I don't know, lady, like this is kind of weird, right? Like, I guess maybe in my back, like, I don't know, it's tight. And then over time, you realize what she's trying to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of now, if someone were to ask me that, I'd be like, oh, I have like the perfect way to describe it, right? So, um, so that was really helpful in kind of attuning to my body again. I think another thing that really helped in building my confidence was um, learning how to be alone. And alone is different than lonely. And I will say, I would like being single and in my 30s, because at that point you have an established career, you know yourself a little bit more. You have all the opportunity in the world to like have fun being alone. And so after I got out of that relationship, I was traveling, I was hanging out with all my friends and doing certain things. I was dating and um but I had to realize that I actually didn't like to be alone. alone. And I avoided that at all costs. I'm actually, for context, I'm a twin. And so I think I've just like, I'm literally used to like having someone next to me since before I
Yeah.
was even born.
Yeah.
Right. So that's something I had to develop on my own. And once I became conscious of that, something subconsciously that I do, that I like to constantly be around other people, always have something going on. And that was part of what I call my crazy eight, where like I'd feel lonely. So then I'd go and plan a million things, and then I'd be anxious and like over planning. And then I get burned out from over planning, then go back into like, okay, I need to like recharge and be alone again. But then I get anxious from being alone. So it was like back and forth, and just recognizing those patterns, those crazy eights that you have for yourself. And like, they're not a bad thing. They are human, and they are trying to meet human needs. My human need is I want to feel connection. I want to feel love. And you shouldn't have to feel ashamed of that, right? And like, how can I meet that need? Maybe in a different way. What's the relationship with myself? So practicing like more self-compassion, not beating myself up as much. I'm such a perfectionist. And so that relationship with myself has changed. And so the crazy eight's okay. You just have to know how to work with it and like what you need and what your body needs. So that was another way that I kind of built confidence in understanding myself, and like, how could I practice being alone in a healthy way? And so once I started, one, being conscious of it and then practicing it, I actually had a lot of freaking fun. And I was way more confident going out by myself, socializing in public and whatever. And that's a skill, especially with technology these days, that's like dying to be able to like go out and do something without the comfort of a Kindle or a phone right in front of you. And so I really challenged myself in certain ways, and that built my confidence back. And another thing as well, I had talked about like exposure and dating, and just getting out there is a way to build your confidence. But one of the things as well that this relationship taught me, that like, whoa, it's way better on the other side. Like, it's okay to walk away. And so the more you practice walking away as well, and like that can be done in an unhealthy way too, right? You see like one red flag and you don't even have a conversation about it. And just like cut the person off. That's unhealthy. Have the conversation. Like, are they responsive? Do they do it again? I think there's a lot of things that play into that. But yeah, being able to walk away too and like find connection in a different way, and be able to be optimistic that there's someone else back out, out there for you, is something too that can be really helpful. And another thing too that I did during this time was, and I chat about this in my book, is actually months after I broke off my wedding, my mom passed away from pancreatic cancer. So it was a really interesting phase in my life where I was single. My dad was single after like 35 years of being married. And so we had a really special relationship and traveled a bit together. And so it's like an opportunity to spend time maybe with people who are, since you're busy socializing, whatever, who maybe don't play as big of a role in your life. So I did a ton of trips with my dad because he was like in retirement phase. I like had no other friends that were willing to travel with me except for my dad. So I'm like, all right, let's go. So we did a couple. And one of the ones that I think is very memorable, we went to Amsterdam, we went to the Netherlands, and we did this. It was during tulip season. They're known for their flowers over there in April. And we were on a boat, and every evening it would like dock in a different area, and it would kind of take you all through the Netherlands, and you'd bike during the day. So the boat would meet up with you as you're like biking through the entire countryside. And so it was such a fun experience. But I was joking kind of when all the people first came on, because it was a group trip. It was like all people, and they're like 60s and above. And I'm like, oh my God, Dad, did you just sign us up for like the Medicaid tour of like biking? What is happening? But over time and chatting with these people, I realized that like, whoa, they're my people. And they were like traveling since before the internet. Like one of these ladies who's like 70 years old has her nose pierced, and she's talking about traveling to Cuba in the 80s, like before like she said she had to like work with someone in the Dominican Republic to buy her a ticket, and she sent them the cash not knowing if like they were going to scam her or not. And they sure enough, they ended up booking it. So it's just like all these stories of these lifelong travelers and the passions. And so that's something that I found too, was I found mentors of what I wanted my life to look like literally decades out, that gave me, I think, a North Star for what I wanted my life to look like. And I think that's something when we get out of an abusive relationship, and this happens in all relationships where like our values and how we live our life start to merge with the other person. And if that's a healthy partner, that's awesome, right? All these things are amplifying each other. But if it's in a toxic relationship, you now maybe don't know what you want, or you thought, you think what your North Star is actually their North Star. And so one of the things that you have to redefine for yourself is what the hell you want out of life. And I was on this trip with all these old people, judging them at first, but then realizing like, oh my gosh, I want to be there was literally an 80-year-old that was biking like 16 miles a day. I was like, I want to be that 80-year-old that's living this life with their wife, going everywhere around the country. And some of them were partnered, some of them were with their friends. And so there are so many ways to find happiness that are like beyond pegging it to having to be with someone else. And they kind of had showed me a different what was possible, which I thought was really nice. And so that inspired me in a way of what I wanted out of a relationship and how I could look for that in a partner. And so that's something too, if you have a mentor or find a mentor that you really love how they've set up their life. And the nice thing about having mentors is they can give you all the secrets of what maybe took them a decade or 2 decades to figure out. And they show you what's possible. And a lot of the times I think coming out of these relationships, we are so bounded and we don't have a sense of abundance. And like, how do you bring that limitless and imagination back to your life? And I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things I really like about the discussion around like being comfortable, like being alone, how being alone doesn't also mean you're lonely, and how you realize like, I want to go on these trips. I want to be like this person, not necessarily like in the confines of like a relationship, but that's like, you want to be happy like them. And that's kind of like the life you want to have. Our society puts so much focus and emphasis on being and getting into a relationship. And it's being in the relationship is the thing that makes you happy. But yes, your relationship should make you happy. You should be like happy and feel loved. But it's all the other stuff too that makes you happy and makes you enjoy the life that you're in. It's not the relationship. It's the person that you're with. It's the experiences that you have in and outside of that relationship that are going to be the things that make you happy.
Yeah. And that's the trick too, actually, is the more that you do things that you like, the better energy that you have, the more people are attracted to you. So I was finding that as I prioritized the activities that I wanted to do, like snowboarding, live music, all these concerts, I was enjoying myself already. And that energy attracted people to me. And I, with my heart being open, because I was enjoying myself, was more willing to receive those people too. So I think it's kind of a cycle. It builds on itself for sure.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful like cap to this episode, Charity. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun to chat.
Yes. So before we sign out here, if somebody wanted to find you on social media or find your book, where could they find that?
Yeah. If you want to go to sameguybook.com/podcast, there's a little gift for your audience to check out there, some extra bonus stuff. But you can also find me on TikTok and Instagram under We're All Dating the Same Guy, which is the name of my book. And that book is on Amazon too. You can check it out there. It's on all different formats, paperback, audio, and ebook, Kindle, if you want it. So yeah, all around.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I have links to all of those in the show notes for our listeners as well, so they can check all that stuff out.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Sean and Amanda.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us, Charity. And thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and other content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.